Hey, it's Friday, November 20th. Let's talk PlayStation. Alright, so it was kind of a slow news week for PlayStation until the last 24 hours when we got our huge big cover story that we're going to be talking about real quick. But before we get into that, let's do our one little news story, which is that Beyond Two Souls for PlayStation 4 is finally coming out. Very soon, actually. November 24th and November 26th for Europe and the US, respectively. Same sort of details we've always seen here. You know, the resolution is 1080p. Some of the other little finer details is that it uses the DualShock 4's mic to enhance the gameplay there when you're playing as the entity in Beyond Two Souls. You can actually play the story in Beyond Two Souls in chronological order now, because if you know that game on PlayStation 3, it actually plays Jodie's story out of chronological order, and some people had a problem with that. But yeah, that's coming out very soon. Going to be around 30 bucks, 30 euro. And March 1st, 2016 is actually when you'll be able to play the Heavy Rain remaster for PlayStation 4. So that's also very good. And actually, they're going to be bundling Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. I believe March 2nd. That's when it's going to come out for 2016. And if you already bought Beyond Two Souls on PSN, this coming week, then you'll get a discount basically for Heavy Rain when it comes out next year. So that's all well and good. Now let's get into our big news story, which is that it is basically confirmed PlayStation 2 emulation for PlayStation 4 is basically on the way. Now, this was kind of revealed in a sort of indirect way with like almost no sort of formal announcement from Sony until publications started talking about this, and Digital Foundry kind of made a little article about this that really kind of blew this whole story off the lid, so to speak. So the PlayStation 4 Star Wars bundle, we all know, we've been seeing some unboxing videos. That console looks pretty cool. We talked about it a while ago when it actually was announced and everything. Well, now that people are getting this thing in their hands and they're getting the download codes, the download code for the 4 Star Wars games, three of which are PlayStation 2 games originally, we're learning that these games actually are PlayStation 2 emulated. So, like I said, Digital Foundry kind of really blew this thing up by actually posting an article about this, but anybody could have really figured this out, which is that when you're playing these games on PlayStation 4, it's quite evident that they are emulated and they are not natively ported over to PlayStation 4. One thing being that there is OS responsive features to actually booting up the game. When you boot up any of these PS2 Classic Star Wars games, you actually get the original PlayStation 2 boot up screen. You actually have start and select that are mapped to the touchpad on the PlayStation 4. And more importantly, when you're going through the menus and actually navigating the game, there are complete references to accessing memory cards, PlayStation 2, the DualShock 2 controller and everything. I mean, it's quite evident that these games are in no way, shape, or form altered. These are the classic original PlayStation 2 games, and they are booted up as such through emulation software. Now, typically, if you're going to be porting a game to PlayStation 4, it's obviously required by Sony and mandated that the game is ported in a very official manner to the point where it's button remapped. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's quite obvious that these games are emulated. And the good thing here is that the PlayStation 4, of course, using a little bit of that extra hardware to actually give us some finer improvements to the PS2 game. So resolution is increased. Digital Foundry isn't necessarily sure if PS4 is really doing much work in terms of texture detail. It might just be more of the fact that the resolution is increased. But you can see that in some sort of the footage that they've released, you're obviously getting sharper images, and the PlayStation 4 is doing some extra little work to actually make these games look a lot better. And there's trophy support, which this is something completely new because typically you'd think, okay, well, if it's a game on PS4, Sony requires all games to have trophies. Not necessarily the case, because PS1 and PS2 Classics have always been omitted from this rule to not need trophy support. If it's an officially licensed, officially developed PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita, or PlayStation 4 game, yes, it needs trophies. But classic games have never required trophies. Now, here's the even more interesting thing. If you remember a long time ago in LTPS, back in 2013, Sony filed a patent to basically allow trophies to work on classic, PS1 Classics, PS2 Classics, and it was a patent kind of detailing how that sort of scenario worked without altering the game in any sort of way, and it basically worked in a bunch of basically the patent was sort of detailing a sort of system-wide situation where the system has sort of a software in place that's kind of monitoring triggers that are going on inside the game, and when trigger A, you know, functions to trigger B, and it's, you know, tracking certain statistics or what have you. You know what I'm saying? It's just like an extra little software system-wide that's tracking whatever the trophy requirement is, and once those requirements are met, the trigger would release, and then thus you'd earn a trophy. And it looks like that patent is now being used here. So that is like everything's kind of coming full circle here, basically. Which, you know, I even had a few questions from a few people the past few years saying, you know, what do you think about that patent? We haven't seen it in a long time. Is something going to happen from it? And of course, you guys know me, I love trophies, so of course I want to see something happen from it. So this whole thing is finally coming together, and this is awesome news. And like I said, this is actually confirmed from Sony now, because, you know, this was just sort of a stealthy little thing. You know, the Star Wars bundle came out. These are the first PS2 emulated games on PlayStation 4 officially. Sony never made any sort of huge announcement about it. And now that publications are talking about it, Sony representatives have replied back saying, yes, PS2 emulation is something we are currently working on. So overall, that's awesome news. Now, if you remember, a very long time ago, we also did an LTPS about this, because for the longest time we have had these rumblings, basically, where it was, you know, what does Sony want to do with PlayStation Now? What does Sony want to do with PS1 and PS2 emulation? And we've heard different things from Sony, whether it was, you know, what they wanted to do with PlayStation Now. There were times where they said they wanted to make PlayStation Now a complete legacy service where they have PS1, PS2, and PS3 on there. Then as of recently, they've mentioned that they want to use PlayStation Now for just PlayStation 3 games specifically. And that they would probably want to do PS1 and PS2 emulation software side. And then a few months back, I don't remember when this happened, but we basically got some European ratings for some PlayStation 2 Classics, Dark Cloud 2, Ape Escape 2. Those games are rated PS2 Classics for PlayStation 4, so that kind of told us PS2 Classics are probably on the way. Now, on the surface of this, it looks awesome, and it is awesome no matter what the result is going to be, but what I'm getting at is that we really don't know what's going to happen just yet in terms of what the full-blown reality of this is going to be. You know, I know a lot of us are thinking to ourselves, hopefully it's disc compatibility. You know, you put the disc in a PlayStation 4 and it's going to play your PS2 games, or PS1. I'm sure PS1 is obviously also being worked on. That's ideally what we want, but realistically, I'm thinking this is more than likely going to be just what it is on Vita and PlayStation 3, which is that it's just going to be PS2 Classics, PS1 Classics on PSN. You can't put a PS2 disc into a PlayStation 3 and play a PlayStation 2 game. You can't do that. Now, PS1 you can. Maybe PS1 discs will be a reality on PS4. I don't know. But basically, you know, I wouldn't necessarily expect discs, but that's what we're hoping for. But here's the whole thing about this, you know, and it always comes back to the conversation of backwards compatibility, and especially with the recent, you know, launch of Xbox 360's support on Xbox One, the difference between hardware and software emulation. Hardware emulation often makes the console a lot more expensive because you have to put the previous components of the, you know, previous platforms in the new platform. But admittedly, when you're doing hardware-based backwards compatibility, it's like a foolproof thing. Basically, you've got that compatibility, and there's really no issue there. Software emulation is an entirely different beast, and it's, you know, ultimately going to make the box more affordable, but it is going to take a very long, arduous road to getting good compatibility. I mean, if you go to the PlayStation 3, if you go on the PlayStation Store and look at PS1 and PS2 Classics, a lot of games on there, sure, but it's just not full-blown compatibility. It's just not. Not every single PS2 game is available on the PlayStation Store. You know what I'm saying? Not every PS1 game is on PSN to buy. So, you know, if it's going to be like PlayStation, if it's going to be like what it is on PS3 and Vita, then we're probably going to get the same sort of scenario where it's kind of a long process of new releases, steady releases, but people still demanding that this game's not on the store yet, this game's not on the store yet. You know, I doubt this is going to be discs. I would love it to be discs, and we're still kind of waiting for that, because as we're recording this, we don't really know what's going on. And, you know, here's the thing is, I mean, the recent release of X1's full compatibility with 360, I use the word full there pretty loosely because that's what's pretty telling about software emulation compatibility. You know, you look at the compatible list on Xbox One right now, only about 100 titles, 104 titles with more coming. If you look at the list of X1's compatibility, a majority of them are arcade titles. So those are very small scale games, and most of the disc-based games are Microsoft published. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's people don't seem to understand this. It's so easy sitting in your home, you know, reading this online and stuff like that, to be sort of, you know, the typical fan reading from your couch or your computer chair, just thinking, oh, you know, why can't these companies do this? Why can't Sony do PS3 backwards compatibility? Why, you know, why can't Microsoft add more games? It's just not that easy. These things just don't happen overnight. And that, like I said, that compatibility list is pretty telling, which is that, and you guys know that I've been saying this for the longest time, which is I've been always praising Microsoft for doing that on Xbox One, because I know it's fucking difficult as hell for them to do that. That list tells you right there. Most of them are arcade titles. Those are probably much easier to get on X1. The disc titles, it was probably a hell of a lot easier for Microsoft to get their own games on there. You know what I'm saying? And when Microsoft says, you know, you got to let us know what games you want, because they got to prioritize what games are going to basically get the safe passage through. You know what I'm saying? They just don't have the time and money to go through every single 360 game and make sure that it works properly on X1, and of course going through all the licensing, you know, requirements and things like that. It's just a very long, arduous process, and it's the same. And it's been the same way on PlayStation when PS3 had PS1 and PS2 Classics. It's just, you know, you don't get that full compatibility like you do hardware backwards compatibility, and this is why Sony is not doing PlayStation 3 backwards compatibility, PlayStation 3 software emulation. This is why they're doing PlayStation Now. They've been very forward about this with PlayStation Now. PlayStation Now is for PS3 backwards compatibility. You want to know why? Because PlayStation 3 is incredibly overly complex. Even Sony knows that. I've beaten this horse to death by now. There's a reason why Sony is not going to do PS3 backwards compatibility. It's just going to be, it probably isn't even possible, to be honest. And Sony probably knows that. It would just cost them way too much money. And that's why PlayStation Now gets such a bad rap, because it's like, oh, you're making us buy our games over again, which is also pretty ridiculous, because nobody's making you do anything. If you own PlayStation 3 games, then play them on your PlayStation 3. No one is making you use a streaming service. So I guess what I'm saying is, there's still a lot we don't know about, you know, going forward. What's this going to turn into? It's definitely a step in the right direction. We've all been wanting something like this, and it's great that Sony finally got the ball rolling. Now I guess we're just waiting on all the questions I've been posing, basically, you know. Compatibility, you know, how long it will be a gradual rollout of games, or will we get more of a mass release of games? Is it going to be like, you know, just like Vita and PS3, where it's going to be just games on the store? Will we get that disc playback as well? You know, the trophy stuff is great. I mean, that's totally awesome, and that was, I'm so glad that we actually saw that patent come back, because I'm assuming that's what's in place here. It's awesome. I'm super happy about that. I just hope that the support for this is there. And I guess the other side of it is me always trying to tell you guys why there's just no chance that there's going to be PS3 compatibility. And I hate to sort of defend Sony in this way, but like it's totally justified on their end as to why they want to do PS Now. Because it's just they'd have to spend so much money trying to make it work on PS3, make it work on PS4 with PS3, and who knows if it's even gonna work. Like they really kind of shot themselves in the foot there by making PlayStation 3 that, you know, difficult to develop for and everything. Because it's even if you have a really capable PC, it is a pain in the ass to emulate PlayStation 3 games. That's to give you some really good perspective. That you can have a super good PC, it is still a pain to emulate PlayStation 3. So that's why I wouldn't expect it at all. It also gives you a reason as to why, again, it's much easier for Xbox to do it, but it's even still pretty hard for them to do it based on their compatibility list out now. And it's going to be a long process for them to even get a decent amount of a decent selection of 360's library back onto X1. Anyway, those are just the two news stories I want to talk about with you guys this week. Check out this week's episode of Ryan on Gaming. It was, will Sony buy more developers? We all know that Sony's really well known for owning the most developers. They buy developers all the time. In recent years, they've bought a few developers. So will they do that going forward? We all know PlayStation 4 is doing extremely well. The company's earning a lot of money. So will they take some of that new PS4 cash and go out and buy a new developer to make more PlayStation 4 exclusives? Pretty good conversation. You want to see that? Check that out. Keep submitting topics for Ryan on Gaming. Please, you know I love getting them. Also, Jack 2 still going on. You guys know that. That game's almost done. Still awesome. Still having fun. Man, I wish I had more updates to give you guys. Actually, I got some cool new videos coming up in the kind of like some new random videos that we don't often do. Those are coming up very, very soon. I wouldn't want to spoil those just yet, but keep your eyes peeled for that for sure. Keep your eyes peeled, and apparently this is the visual aid for keeping your eyes peeled, so you know, you learn something new every day. That concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Beck. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I'll see you guys next Friday. See, this is why we need studio lights, because you can't see shit.